Good morning. Before we get started, Ann has a brief announcement to make.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ann Brand, and I'm here to tell you about another program, an exciting program that's coming up in October. On October 21st, Healthcare for All Washington, which some of you may know quite well and have supported over the years, will be holding its annual meeting here at Horizon House. And I just want to encourage you all to attend. And I'm also been asked, Mary Margaret, who has been a long supporter of Healthcare for All Washington, as have I, has asked me to kind of coordinate our sort of hosting responsibilities for the program. So I will be looking for volunteers to act as greeters for the people who are coming. So I'm going to make note of everybody who's here, and you may hear from me. Anyway, put it on your calendars, October 21st, Saturday.
In the morning?
1 to 3.
1 to 3. All right, good morning and welcome to Let's Talk Science. We're under the impression, and we're constantly reminded of it, that we have the best healthcare system in the world. Well, it's certainly the most expensive healthcare system in the world, but whether or not it's the best is the subject of our speaker today, who's going to talk about whether or not, in fact, you're healthier or you're more likely to die at an early age in the United States than other countries in the world. Our speaker is Dr. Stephen Bezruchka, and he's from the University of Washington in the Department of the School of Public Health. His background is quite varied, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that, except that I might add that his concern with the mortality and the health of citizens in the United States as compared to other countries has been the work of a lifetime. And so I'm going to let him tell you all about it. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Bezruchka.
Thank you, Jack. And thank you all for coming. And what am I doing with a title for a talk like that? How many believe that living in this country is bad for your health? Okay. What I'm going to do is try and challenge a lot of the things that we believe in this country and see where that takes us. And if this is going to work, what we do a lot these days is a land acknowledgement. Recognize that we live on stolen lands and sacred lands, the Duwamish around here. And what I'm hearing in so many presentations is the land acknowledgement, but we don't do anything about it. So we continue to pillage the natives, and we'll talk a little bit more about indigenous health. But first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about me so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about and why. So I used to be a mathematics graduate student at Harvard. And I decided I wanted to do something more useful, and so I applied to medical school. But I applied too late for the incoming class that year, and so I had what people now call a gap year. What am I going to do with that year? Well, I'd spent a lot of time climbing mountains, and my friend who was then in Tanzania that I'd climbed with said, let's go to Nepal. And so I decided, yeah, I'll join David in Nepal. And I befriended Dan Taylor, who was working for family planning, USAID Family Planning Project in Nepal. And so he said, following his family planning ideas, I want you to distribute condoms in the hills. So he gave me boxes of condoms, and I said, okay, and I took them. And what was I going to do with them? This is 1969. I wasn't going to demonstrate how to use them. So mostly I blew them up as balloons for kids. in that entire year walking in Nepal, only one person knew what a condom really was. But these kids had a great time playing with them as volleyballs in these amazing mountain backdrops. Based on that year walking in the country, I wrote the first trekking guidebook and that was published in 1972. And the 8th edition was published in 2011, and as you can tell, I'm too lame to revise it, so that's going to be the last edition. I went to medical school at Stanford wanting to do mathematical modeling of cancer processes. But then I spent this year in Nepal, and I said, boy, I don't think that's a good thing to do. I want to provide healthcare services in remote areas of Nepal. So I ended up a week's walk from the road west of Pokhara, running a community health project where there was nothing of the 20th century except my shortwave radio that I listened to. And I provided pretty primitive care and also interfaced with the traditional healers in that Himalayan valley. Oops, here we are. And this is a shaman, a Jankri. And the idea is if you're sick, you've offended some spirit. So you go to this specialist who chants and beats his drum and goes into a trance. So the spirit that is afflicted, that you've angered, speaks through him and says what to do. Well, we now use shamans in complementary medicine in this country, right? And so I was ahead of the game back then. I then, in the mid-'80s, set up a remote district hospital as a teaching hospital for Nepali doctors. And I supervised them. And again, in these remote areas, they don't have modern techniques. And so I taught open drop ether. That is a form of anesthesia that we developed in the United States back in 1853. You put some gauze over somebody's mouth and you drop ether on it and they go to sleep. It's pretty safe. And when you don't have electrocautery, you're not going to, it's not going to explode. And so that became my experience. The many years I've spent in Nepal have given me the background of working with other cultures, not being dependent on technology, and gaining an understanding of health that has really made me stop and think about what I really believe. So I started obsessing with the ideas I'm going to present to you in the 1990s, and I appeared on programs like Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman, and I also did TED Talks, and so this is a University of Washington TED Talk I did a couple of, some years ago. My family, I have a wife and 2 children. Marianne Mercer was here doing a talk, I think, last month, and she spent time in Nepal. So I met her when I went back to public health school at Hopkins, and so I married my teacher. Well, no, only Newt Gingrich did that. Well, surprise, I've now become a grandpa. This is my grandson, now 2 months old, and the father and mother are down in Los Angeles. He's an internal medicine resident, and so this is Malachi. So I'm very proud to be a grandpa. It took me 80 years to get there, but what the heck. So what I want to do as we go along is I would like you to ask questions or raise issues or disagree as we go. I was told to talk for 40 minutes and then have questions, but I think it's much better if we interact as I go along. So everybody here has lived a long life. I see a lot of gray hairs, so I'm assuming that. And so let me ask you, what's been responsible for your living a long life? Can we pass these microphones out so everybody can hear? So raise your hand, grab a microphone, and talk about what's responsible for your being here today.
Public health.
Hi. Okay, yeah, I'm Bob Brown, and I've answered that question a lot recently, and people wonder why, and so I asked my doctor why. He said, "Well, it's because you exercise every day of your life. You have,
Okay.
and
Good.
it's here at Horizon House. It's very easy. It's almost embarrassing if you don't do it."
Good. Thank you.
I happened to get the right genes, which my wife didn't. I lived out in nature a lot, and I gathered a lot of dirt and freaked out my mother when I was a kid. So I got all this stuff when I was little, and I ate healthily and been lucky.
Good. Thank you. By the way, nature therapy is paid for by medical plans in some countries. You know, in Germany, for example, if you're sick, they'll send you into the forest and pay for it. Please.
It's not because of genes, since my mother and dad died at 63 and 64. But when I had scarlet fever as a child, there was a serum available that kept me from
Okay.
either dying or having serious heart problems.
So medical care did some good. Somebody else. Yeah.
Socioeconomic status and good insurance.
Huh. Why would that matter? By insurance, do you mean healthcare insurance?
Healthcare insurance.
Okay. And
Yeah.
socioeconomic status, what does that have to do with anything?
Better living conditions, better clean water, decent food,
Okay.
all the things that contribute to keeping us healthy. And even though I think our medical system has deteriorated and is no longer the best in the world, I benefited by it because I had a lot of problems and a lot of interventions in my life that kept me alive. So I don't know that it would be the case anymore. It's just impossible. But I think it's genes, medical intervention, and luck.
Yeah, let me tell you. Oh, please. Well, let me tell you a little story, about the benefits of medical care. As a kid, I had a patch of acne right here. You know how teenagers are with acne. And so my mother took me to a dermatologist. This was 1957. And he said, "That's no problem. We'll just radiate it." So he put me in this room. He put this cone beamed on my patch of acne, closed this big, heavy door, and I heard a bzzz. And then he came in, opened the door, and said, "Come back next week." And after about 2-3 treatments, the acne was gone, and I was just delighted. So medical care can really do something good for acne.
Heart stents and a heart valve.
Okay. Agreed? Anybody else? What's been responsible? Here's somebody waving their hand over here.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's take her first. She's got the microphone.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I benefited from some fantastic spinal surgery at Virginia Mason. I'm fused almost my whole spine, and it's just been fabulous. And my doctor said we couldn't have done this 5 years ago. It's that up to date and remarkable.
Wow, good. Yeah, I have severe spinal stenosis myself, but please.
I think my survival has been because of my mother, who always served us at least 3 vegetables every day, and she was interested in health. She read health books. Bernard McFadden, I think it was. She was reading some of those books about keeping well, and she went for walks every day.
Okay.
If she had lived 2 more weeks, she would have been 100. When she
Wow.
passed finally, I think I've told that story many times, but she never fried anything for us. She baked or broiled it, and except she had to fry a steak for Dad because he liked beef. But she was a real influence.
So how many
I
think
would
a healthy diet is really important for health? Not everybody's hand went up. I think this is interesting. Okay, please.
I'm 93, and I think I contribute my longevity to the fact that I had a grandmother who made it to 107, and I haven't met anyone who can beat that yet.
Okay. By the way, there's a Netflix series that just came out on living to 100. It's about places called blue zones. Blue zones are these 4 places in the world where people forget to die. So it's a 4-part series. It's worth watching. I followed the guy who produced it, and this is his best effort yet.
Okay. Wonderful medicine, wonderful environment, but at the same time also luck. I should have been dead long ago when I was still a child. I had every childhood disease that came along, including polio, diphtheria, you name it. I lived during the war, bombs falling around me. I'm here, and I cannot attribute it to anything else except luck. I happen to be in America. I happen to be able to get here. I happen to get good and sometimes not stellar medical service, but I've survived it all, and I hope to survive another 20 years, sort of.
Okay.
I would appreciate it if you could tell us how to unconfound the 2 factors that have been mentioned, which is heredity and environment. And also the point that Ina just made about chance, that my father lived to be 91. He once walked so far on a Sunday afternoon that he had to call us up to see if we could figure out how to send a taxi to pick him up. Chance played an important role in my life because when I came to the University of Washington, there was an assistant professor in the physical education department who thought that the faculty wasn't getting enough exercise. And he asked, what is it you do? And basically I did nothing except mow the lawn. And he then had a class every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 o'clock. And I continue to do those exercises. If the people in the gym here have asked me, why do you do what you do? Well, I do what I do because that's what Eric Hughes said that I should do 65 years ago. And today is my birthday, and I'm now 94. But I don't know how to unconfound heredity, environment, and chance, because it was just chance that I went to this class that Eric Hughes gave.
So I can do a little bit about heredity in a few minutes, but one more and then I got to move on. Or
you mentioned blue zones. Well, our Nancy Najilski over there, put your hand up, Nancy, leads our nutrition group of the Environment Committee, and we put on blue zone dinners every few weeks.
Okay, great. Well, all right. Who's lived in other countries? And how healthy are people in those other countries? A couple hands over here.
Germany's very good.
Yeah, there's a couple of people with their hands up over there.
We lived in England, and at that time it was right after the war, and it was so poor that I don't know what their health really was like.
Okay.
Same with Germany.
Okay.
Great Britain. And we had, of course, a national health system.
Okay, and I detect a British accent, so. Any other examples of people living in other countries?
I lived in France and had some medical problems, and the coverage was wonderful, and the doctors were very caring and focused on me and my problems when they needed to. So people eat well. There's a whole lot one can say about French eating habits, but they don't snack. They don't eat junk. And I'm a fan of the health care.
Good.
And of the coverage.
Great. One more over there, and then I'm going to move on. This is a very talkative group. Oh, okay, one there and then there.
I lived in Scandinavia, Denmark, and Sweden. And although it was known that I was only going to be there temporarily, I was brought into the health plans in both countries. No questions asked.
Thank you. Last question.
We lived in Canada, among other countries, and I should say, malpractice that two of in my family had experienced. We are still dealing with it.
Malpractice. Okay. All right. So, and just in terms of full disclosure, I was born in Toronto and spent the first 21 years of my life in Toronto. I worked in British Columbia. I've been on the faculty in Alberta. And that's a bit of my background too. But at your age, what are you more concerned with? Not dying or well-being or happiness? How many are concerned about not dying? Choose one of them. Okay. How about well-being? Whatever that is. Okay. How about happiness? All right. So let's look at what happiness trends over ages are. And it's a U-shaped curve. That is, when you're young, you're pretty happy. And then as you reach the 20s, 30s, and 40s, your happiness declines. And you're in the upswing for happiness. And this cartoon, I think, says it very well. That is the U-shaped happiness over age. When you're young and dating, and then you're squabbling over kids and washing diapers and so on. And then you throw away your crutches and your canes and you're pretty happy again. Does this make sense? Yeah, I think it does. Our happiness is kind of U-shaped over age. So enjoy your happiness and well-being and don't worry about dying. Can we age gracefully as a country? This was the front page opinion of the New York Times last Sunday, asking this question about, can America age gracefully? And I would wonder whether or not that's really happening. And this cartoon, I think, sort of shows it pretty well. We are using a lot of technology and we need people to push us around. And it kind of works. But how does it vary in different countries? We talked about Scandinavia. We talked about Great Britain and so on. So then we got to ask the question, how healthy is America? Now, I worked as an emergency doctor for 30 years, including some years over in Virginia Mason. The easiest diagnosis I could make in the emergency department was that somebody was dead. Very hard to fudge. All I had to do was fill out a death certificate, and that went to Olympia, and it was matched with the birth certificate of that person. And so we knew that allowed us to calculate mortality rates. And the mortality rate that I want you to focus on is what's called life expectancy. If the mortality stayed the same, how long would people live? And the statistical measure is the expectation of life at birth. So let's think of health as of a country. So you need a population. So I came up with the term Health Olympics. Suppose health was an Olympic event, and suppose the measure was life expectancy, okay? So countries compete in Olympic events. We've won the most gold medals since they started in the 1920s. We typically win the most medals or the second most in the Winter Games. We sometimes don't do so well. So suppose health was an Olympic event when the race was how long you lived. So here we are in the United States. We spend half of the world's healthcare bill. $4.2 trillion. It's a sixth of our total economy. So we spend a lot of money on healthcare. How many would give us the gold medal, the longest lived? How many would put us in the top 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 to 10. 1, 2, 11 to 15. 1, 2, 3, 16 to 20. 1, 2, 3, 21 to 25. Anybody put us that low? 26 to 30. 1, 2, below 30. Guess what? I mean, so below 30, 31, 32, 33. Nobody put us there. You all failed. So these are the data from the United Nations Human Development Report for 2021. All the UN countries ranked by life expectancy, by the lifespan of the people in that population. I want to focus on this for quite a while because nobody got, how many thought, here we are, 44th. 43 countries, people in 43 countries live longer lives. Now, that's fine. Maybe you don't want to live a long life. If that's so, then you're in the right place. Does anybody, surely you must not believe this. Okay, you weren't factoring in. The gun violence is an interesting situation. We have 140 guns per 100 people in this country. That's more guns per person than any other country has by far, and more guns in the hands of civilians than the military has. Same for semi-automatic rifles, those things. So remember, I've been following the Health Olympics since we only started recording births and deaths in 1933. So we don't have data for every country because they don't record births and deaths so accurately, but we do have estimates. And back in the 1950s, we were somewhere in the top 5. The life expectancies numbers were lower. Our health has been improving for a long time. So back in the 1950s, we were one of the longest lived countries in the world. Not as long as the numbers were a lot lower. And then over time, when I went to medical school in 1970, we were 17th. When I went to public health school in 1992, we were 22nd. And so our standing among countries has steadily declined, and now we're 44th. Well, does it really matter? Maybe it's just, we're about 8 years behind Japan, the longest lived country. Is that just 8 years drooling in a nursing home? And if so, I don't want that. What does that difference, almost 8 years, represent? What's our leading disease killer? What's our second killer? What's our third killer in 2021? COVID. Okay. Suppose we eradicated our the leading 3 killers in 2021, how many life expectancy years would we gain? About 7.5. So if we eradicated our 3 leading killers, then we'd still not be the healthiest country. We'd be close, but not there. So why? Well, it must be personal behaviors, right? How many here smoke cigarettes? How many here used to smoke cigarettes? Okay, thank you for being honest. Out of all the countries on this list, which country has the lowest proportion of men smoking cigarettes? I heard Japan. I'm wrong. Which country on this list has the highest proportion of men smoking cigarettes? Japan. About 45% of men smoke cigarettes in Japan. Anybody been to Japan? Do you see a lot of men smoking there? Yeah. There are signs on the sidewalk saying you got to smoke indoors. I kid you not. It doesn't make sense. The United States and Sweden have the lowest proportion of men smoking on this chart, 15%. So 3 times as many men smoke in Japan than here. So if I told you that's the reason Japan's so healthy, namely they all smoke, you'd be wise to turn off your hearing aids and go elsewhere for lunch. But it suggests that something like obviously bad behavior matters a lot in the United States, but less in Japan. Why might that be the case? Please.
We have a big span between very poor and very rich, but we do not have a medical system that evens that out.
So we have a big gradient, a span between the poor and the rich, and that's going to be one of my major arguments that that's killing us. Inequality is killing us. It's the title of my book, Inequality Kills Us All. So do you ever see a lone Japanese tourist? Do you ever see a lone American tourist? All the time. They have this concept of wa, or social harmony. They do things together. And when you're in a group, you may have your own feelings about somebody. Oh, I don't like them, you're tatamai. But the group harmony, hone, you suppress your own feelings so the group has harmony. And that is a cultural part of Japan that really impacts health tremendously. It's the hardest thing in public health to study, but it's vitally, vitally important. So the United States is not doing so well. The difference is huge. And what's been happening over time? Well, this is just, the graph there was way too busy if we put all the countries there. But this is looking at life expectancy from 1980 to 2021. And the gray lines are sort of the other, oh, by the way, before I leave this, all the other rich countries, people have longer lives, and some not so rich, such as Slovenia or Chile or Thailand even. So these are not so rich countries without state-of-the-art healthcare systems where people live longer lives. But just to take the other rich countries and take averages, so the gray heavy line is the rich country average from 1980 to 2021, and the red line is, of course, the United States. And what we see is back in 1980, the difference wasn't so big between the US and the average, but it's really ballooned. So what's been going on in America to produce this? Notice that in starting around 2015, the curve leveled and then dropped, and it started dropping, and it was dropping before COVID. What has made our health worse in the last few years? Any thoughts? Please, a microphone back there, or shout it out. Okay, so.
Roundup, and the Roundup is in the soil of all the.
Okay, so Roundup, glyphosate, that's killing us. Okay, that's one thought.
I think it ought to be all the arguing we do.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. Somebody back here?
Technology.
Our technology, surely it's helping us, right? I mean, I can push all these
well,
buttons and all these things help us.
But I wasn't thinking of it helping necessarily, that the sitting, the inactivity of it all is detrimental to your health for long periods.
How many guns did you say we have? I think that might have a factor.
Sorry, the first? Guns, yes. We have 50,000 gun deaths a year, suicides, homicides. We have a lot of mass shootings now. I can talk about that. I got to move on or it's going to be lunchtime. So I want you to think, does anybody know 2 people under age 65 who died in America? Think of people you know who've died. If they had lived in Australia or Germany or Canada or Portugal, only 1 would have died. And this is this report, Missing Americans, published in June by a stellar group of public health researchers. And they concluded that from 1980 to 2019, 11 million Americans died that wouldn't if they'd been in the other rich countries. 11 million missing Americans. That works out to 700 a day. That's 2 jumbo jets crashing every day. It's a 9/11 every 4 days. And we're totally unaware of it. We don't talk about it. Remember 9/11, we just had the 22nd anniversary. Because of those 3,000 deaths, we invaded 2 countries and killed an enormous number of civilians, and that cost us quite a few $1 trillion. But we're not made aware of these jumbo jets, 2 crashing every day. Nobody wants to present bad news here, but I'm breaking that rule. Life expectancy can be calculated almost at any age. How many years do you have left? And this is the calculation for women at age 50, comparing 6 countries: United States, Japan, Australia, France, Italy, and Spain. So going from 1955 to 2007. The heavy black bar is the United States, and the light brown bar is Japanese women. So back in 1955, Japanese women had the lowest life expectancy of these countries, and the United States had the highest. And look what happened to Japanese women. They raced on ahead, and nobody touches the lifespan of Japanese women. What happened to American women? They were clearly in the race until 1980, and then you fell behind. Why? What happened that American women stopped seeing the health improvements of women in these other 5 countries? Any thoughts? Microphone over there.
The increase in processed foods.
Okay, diet change. Didn't happen in the other countries? Here's somebody over here.
Difference between rich and poor.
Okay, inequality. Anybody else? Okay, what's expected of American women? You've got to have a successful career. You've got to be a devoted wife. You've got to be a caring soccer mom, have to have the looks of a supermodel, the physique of a jock, and you've got to be a porn star. It's hard to do all that stuff. And you get no help in this country. The other countries have an awful lot of social supports, and so the expectations are not as great. And by the way, if I showed you this chart for men, it wouldn't look quite so stark because, not much has changed. We're still the same old jerks we've always been, we men. And the gender inequality, it's tougher to be a woman, especially in the United States. And I'll bet some of you have experienced that. Another thing is to say the longest lived people at any time are not living in this country. And to present that data, I'm just going to say, well, here's a graph that explains that, but I'm not going to dissect it for you since it's kind of complicated. But the oldest old are never in the United States, and the richest among us who tend to live longer than the poorest don't compare with average people in other countries. So that begs the question, why are some countries healthier than others? We've heard diet, we've heard glyphosate, something about medical care. Why? The healthcare system makes a big difference. Obesity, okay. We're the biggest country. That is, we have, the biggest sizes here. Obesity matters. By the way, diet. Go back to Japan. The healthiest prefecture in Japan until recently was Okinawa. Excuse me. And if you go to the Netflix How to Live to Be 100 Blue Zone series, they portray Okinawa there, and they talk about their diet. I've been to Okinawa. I had read the diet in Okinawa was pork fat and noodles. I'd read that. And then I went there, and guess what they mostly ate? Pork fat and noodles. The diet presented in the movie is, I think, not accurate based on my experiences there. Yeah, they eat a lot of what they say in the movie, but they slight the pork fat and noodles because it doesn't fit their picture. So diet doesn't matter as much as we think it does, nor does personal behaviors such as smoking. So we have to sort of face the fact that where you live matters. So I'm going to present a map of U.S. county life expectancy in 2020, with the red being the lowest life expectancy and the dark blue being the highest. So how many have lived in, well, blue zones, not the ones that are in the Netflix. How many of you have lived in healthy counties? Okay. What's different there? Better education, yes. Other thoughts? How many have lived in the redder counties? What's going on there? Notice where the red is. It's the Mississippi Valley, Appalachia, the Southeast, and then there's patches of red. It doesn't do me any good to point this out. Right there in southern North Dakota, southern South Dakota is Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which is the lowest life expectancy in the country. Notice Hawaii, this chain of islands over there. They're all blue. I'll talk a little more about Hawaii. And Alaska has some good health and not so good health. And we're not doing too badly in Washington State. So we talked about healthcare. How much of your health did you have a question? Sorry, I thought I saw your hand up. She was, okay, sorry. So how many have experienced, you've talked about the good experiences you've had with healthcare. I told you my great experience of having acne melt away. Guess what? 17 years later, a lump appeared here. And it turned out to be a lymphoma. This was 1975. And I eventually decided on the no treatment for my lymphoma, because there was no evidence that for my particular type of lymphoma, treatment prolonged life. And so my doctor, Saul Rosenberg at Stanford, advised, let's just treat when there's a reason to treat, because of, like, I had a big node blocking off my right ureter, and I got radiation for that. And then in 2013, the lymphoma reverted to a more aggressive form, and I had a lot of chemotherapy then. So yes, I think the treatment in 2013 has been beneficial. But remember, I was treated with standard of medical care with radiation back in the 50s. We used to use radiation to treat asthma and to treat heavy menses and a whole bunch of things. And we stopped doing that. That's called a medical reversal. Stuff we used to do, we don't do anymore. And there's stuff we didn't do then, like give somebody aspirin for having a heart attack, that we do now. So medical care is not so, it can do some good and it can do some harm. Anybody had any harm from medical care? Please. Do you have a microphone? Okay, don't. Okay.
I guess what I'll say is allergies to medicine.
Okay. So remember I said Hawaii, okay, Hawaii is our longest lived state. The Department of Health in Hawaii produced a report, this is the Department of Health, on social determinants. And so this is the part of the cover and on the left-hand side is the graphic on page 2, which explains everything about health that you need to know. So Hawaii has a lot of mountains and stuff. So they use a mountain metaphor, Makai, downstream effects, and Mauka, upstream to the sky. So let's look at what they put downstream. Well, all the chronic diseases out in the water that you're going to have and I used to treat. And then what's on the shore above that? Risk factors, smoking, physical inactivity, obesity. You've all said that. Hawaii puts that far down. And what's on the other side of the river? Medical care. The Department of Health in Hawaii situates medical care pretty far downstream. What's in the middle where the waterfall is raging? What we now call the social determinants of health. Environment, geography, poverty, racism. By the way, I haven't said much about racism, but it's a huge factor impacting health. Income, wealth, education. That's in the big waterfall. What's above that is a root cause. Socioeconomic conditions. Somebody said that over here. And what's above that? Political context and governance. Somehow our longest lived state, Hawaii, believes that politics is what matters to produce health. Keep that in mind. So just to look at healthcare, this is a graph of life expectancy on the vertical axis and money spent on healthcare and purchasing power in adjusted dollars and the 10 countries at the top. And from 1995 to 2015. And you can see the United States, we spend a lot and don't get very much. And even at the high end of our life expectancy, we're not where Japan, the blue line on the upper left, was back in 1995. So we spend a lot and don't get very much. And why might that be? Well, I worked as a doctor for 40 years and I was busy mopping up the floor. I just couldn't keep up with all the flow. What needs to be done? Come on, you know. Turn off the tap, turn off the spigot. Whose job is that in the United States? No one, I would offer. Don't understand what you're getting. Okay. Healthcare is, so here's an overflowing sink. And we healthcare workers are busy mopping up all the water that's pouring out. How would we prevent this issue? Turn off the tap or clean out the drain. And since we spend 1/6 of our total economy on healthcare, I don't think we want to do that. It provides too many jobs and too many profits for people. All right, how much of your health depends on what happened to you before you went to school? A student of mine did an Ignite talk at Town Hall to present the story that roughly, as you go from the erection to the resurrection, roughly half of your health as an adult is programmed between the erection and by the time you're blowing out 2 candles on your 2nd birthday cake. That's 1,000 days. So many studies show that your health is determined by these conditions in the first 1,000 days after conception. Most of us don't think of that. We think our health is under our own control. But if this is true, half of our health is programmed in this early period, then whose responsibility is that? Your parents or society's? For example, one thing that's really important is that parents have time and resources to parent. There are only 2 countries in the world that don't give a working woman who's pregnant paid time off as a national policy to after she has her baby to parent. One is, of course, the United States, and the other is Papua New Guinea, half of a big island north of Australia. So one of the reasons we don't do so well is we don't support early life. And it all starts in the womb. So here you are, this is the womb with a view hypothesis. You're inside the womb, you're monitoring the outside world. Is it going to be a nice, nurturing world, and I can program my physiology to survive, to be born at term with a healthy birth weight, or is it a hostile world? And there's a lot of trouble out there, and I better compromise my organ development and pop out early to be ready to do what we're all here to do, which is to survive, to reproduce. And in doing that, we then face all the chronic diseases as we age. So this first period is really, really important, and healthier countries, you know, the Scandinavian countries, Canada, the United Kingdom, they have very generous policies supporting early life in so many ways, and we do not. We talked about inequality, and I could rather, I'm running out of time, rather than present more graphs, the more income inequality, the more problems we have with our health. And there are now about 500 studies on this. For example, mass shootings in the United States, 4 more victims per incident, are more likely to occur where there's high income inequality and great wealth. So people take it out, they resent that, and they go on a shooting spree. So what have we been doing in the last 40 years? We've taken $50 trillion. This is Robert Reich's point of view. He was the Clinton Secretary of Labor. And he pointed out, and studies verified this, that we've taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90% and given it to the top 1%. And that creates a huge wealth pump, a lot of power imbalance, and it's not so good. I'll skip over this other than to say in the in the 40s and 50s, it was the poorest fifth that saw the biggest income gains. And now we've decided instead to give all our resources to the richest, actually 0.0001%. So the socioeconomic gradient, you know, if you had a first-class ticket on the Titanic, 60% survived. Second class, 40%. Third class or crew, a quarter survived. Lesson, always get a first-class ticket on the Titanic or anywhere you go, because there's always this gradient that some of you mentioned between richer and poorer do more poorly. I haven't talked too much about stress, but we are one of the highest stressed countries in the world. This is a street sign from Oakland, California, back in the early 1980s. Stress at work, powerless, is bad for your health. What's our response? Call 653-6166 for stress counseling and family counseling. Is that going to do it? See, here's a societal problem. Our response is individual. Not a good idea. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to do a cashectomy. We need to take from the rich and give it back to the poor where we stole it. And my book, Inequality Kills Us All, details all these ideas, and so this is the ad, and I'll leave you with this. There's my email. Happy to engage in more discussion and answer any more questions. So,
okay, we have an opening for questions.
Turn the light. I'm sorry to have depressed you. I really have.
I think the basic problem is lack of health care, universal health care in the United States, and that's due to money interests who don't want taxes.
I mean, we should have universal health care. At the government level, we already spend more money per capita on health care than any other country that has universal health care. So yes, I agree with you. We should have universal health care, but it won't It won't solve the problem. I wish it were, but the evidence is not there. Healthcare, in careful studies, amounts to about 10% of health production. 10%. Important, but
In terms of what we can do about all of this, it's up to us, I think, as voters to make the decision that this has to be our priority. In Washington State, there have been tremendous strides. The Healthcare for All Washington group and other groups who've been committed, Physicians for Social Responsibility, it's very slow, and it drives me crazy and has for a long time. But there is no other solution than that every single one of us who care enough about this and who can see it insist that whoever represents us at whatever level they are understands the importance of this change. And I give full marks to, for example, Apple Care for Children. That has made a huge difference here and has been led by politicians who have been forced into it by either their conscience or their voters. So let's fight the good fight together and move the needle.
I agree. So I'm on the board of Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. And so we have an Economic and Equity Health Task Force. One of the issues that has to be understood, the United States made Japan the longest lived country in the world. We occupied Japan after we destroyed it in the Second World War. And the head of the occupation was the world's greatest population health doctor, General Douglas MacArthur. And he instituted 3 policies. Basically, the United States wrote the Constitution for Japan. And it had one clause, Article 9, that says Japan shall never go to war. It has to resolve all disputes peacefully, never maintain a standing army. Article 23 said the government is responsible for the health of the people. Imagine that. The Constitution has a clause telling the government it's responsible for the health of the people. Democratization, they gave everybody the vote. I mean, the Constitution we wrote gave everybody the vote. The Constitution also gave the right to labor unions to organize. And Japanese labor unions are organized vertically from the sweeper to the boss. Our unions are organized horizontally. I think the Japanese system is better. The third D, decentralization, said Japan had 13 big, powerful families that warmongered the people, the Zaibatsu. And he broke them up and said, let's not have this huge concentration of wealth and power. It's really interesting to read MacArthur's memoir. He said, you can't have a democracy with this concentration of wealth and power. And so one of the things that happened is he legislated a maximum wage of 60,000 yen, which is about $4,000 then. So imagine a maximum wage. Somebody else in this country once tried to pass a maximum wage law, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Sometimes I show a cartoon, or I show the front page of the New York Times for April 28th, 1942. And the lead headline is $25,000 income limit asked by president. So Roosevelt proposed 100% tax, highest marginal tax rate on all incomes above $25,000. That's about $450,000 today, and many of us could live on that if we had to. So what happened? That didn't pass. Congress passed a 94% tax in 1944. In 1946, it was raised to 96%, the highest marginal tax rate. And then in the 50s, it was 91%, and now the highest tax rate is down in the mid-30s. So if we take combined federal, state, and local taxes, add them all up together, who pays the lowest rate of tax? The richest 400 families. When you put all the taxes together, I mean, they could afford to pay more. You know, the bottom half pays a huge amount of tax in proportion to their income. So there's lots of things we can do. Please.
Assuming that reading your book, I would get an answer to this, but I will ask you, briefly list the 5 things that you think will improve our health care in the United States.
Health or health care?
Health
Do
care.
you want health or health care?
Well, okay, health.
Okay. Number 1, decrease inequality by changing our tax policy. Fund early life and let Papua New Guinea be the only country that doesn't have a paid parental leave program. We have a paid parental leave program in Washington State, it took effect in 2019, but it only provides 12 weeks of paid leave. Go 100 miles north to Canada and they get a year at 60% pay paid from unemployment insurance, and often the employer tops that up. You go to Sweden, somebody over here talked about Sweden. In Sweden, you have to take 444 days of parental leave at full pay, and the father has to take, it's joint with the father. Father has to take 13 weeks. In the second year, the rest of the second year, instead of full pay, it's 70% pay. And then in your child's third year, you can put your child in a Swedish government-run daycare center that's free. And what is the requirements to be a daycare worker in Sweden? You have to have an advanced degree in play. Why? Well, the kid's now 3. You got to socialize the kid, and we need experts. What are our requirements for working in daycare? Except minimum wage or even less. So we get what we pay for.
We're going to have time for about 1 or 2 more comments,
Okay.
and then
How do you get the taxes changed when you have an attitude basically in this country of everybody for himself? It
So-
has been that way since really the inception of the country. We have, it's your own entrepreneurship, etc. And also we have this idea of rights without responsibility.
Yeah, it's kind of, I can go a few places with there. Back in the 1930s, what got the New Deal going? Well, trade unions were very strong. We had 2 socialist parties and a communist party, and they all badgered the president. And, he was a rich Democrat, and they said, hey, if you don't give us what we deserve, we're going to take you on. So the power of the people is greater than the power of the people in power. We just have to work together. And I sort of use the phrase, we have to organize or die. We're already dying. So the way to get out of that is to work together. And so I think when I was talking to medical students on Tuesday, I asked them, why we're dead first. And student raised his hand and he said, capitalism. And so I asked the students, how many of you here identify as socialists, medical students? And maybe half the hands went up. That's been a tremendous change because you grew up in the Cold War and communism was a 4-letter word. Socialism was just as bad. But young people are different. And so I think we have to work with young people. Chapter 10 of my book is What Can You Do? I make my students develop a 30-second elevator speech. Can you take these ideas and put them in your own words in a very brief period of time? Social media, they're expert at social media. There are lots of ways you can go there. We have lots of ways in which we can disseminate these ideas. Go out and practice.
One aspect that you have not really touched upon is the political aspect. With the current situation, the mental health impact on especially our generation, I think is enormous in my opinion. And one of the reasons I'm saying that is if we think back at the communist system, in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, alcoholism was encouraged by the political structure. And it was such because the people had absolutely, an intelligent, a normal individual could not exist rationally in that system. And I'm afraid that something like that might begin to creep up into America, into our America as well, considering what is happening politically.
It's already here. We consume 80% of the world's opioids. 80% of the world's opioids are consumed in this country. And we have 120,000 deaths a year from opioid overdoses. It's the same as alcohol in Russia. And you know, you can buy your fentanyl on the street corner, or you can have it delivered, Uberized. I mean, we have a huge problem here, and I think it's comparable to the alcohol in Russia.
I'm sure we could go on for a few hours, days, weeks, and unfortunately we need to call it to an end here, and join me in thanking Dr. Bezruchka for his help.
Thank you, thank you.